Testing 1, 2, 3. Do that. Hello.
It's closer to me, please. Hello, Miss Stephanie. How are you?
I'm so good. How are you today?
I am wonderful. I'm wonderful. Yeah,
Awesome.
can you move the straw so it's not in the frame? Yeah. Ponytail.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me today. Will you please share with the audience your name and the short title to your story?
Ooh, my given name is AmiLynne Carroll. My spirit name is Babs, and that is short for Badass Butterfly. And the title to my short story today is Overcome and Moving Beyond Borrowed Beliefs.
Okay. So AmiLynne, tell me about, or do you want me to call you Babs?
Oh, you get to call me whatever you want. I answer to all kinds of stuff.
As long as it's not mean, right? Okay,
Hey, mean is also a perspective. So,
that's fair. Okay. So what AmiLynne, tell me about what was your life like when you were a kid? What was normal? What was your family life like? Where did you grow up? What time frame are we talking?
well, time frame way back in the early 1970s. Wow, I never thought I would say that way. Um, it's interesting because my childhood story actually shifted when I was 35 years old. Because at 35 years old, I found out I was adopted at 18 months old and had never been told. My name was changed. So the birth name that I was given at birth, I had no idea that that person existed because when I was adopted, they gave me a whole new name, first, middle, and last. And so I was born and raised in Southern California. My father was a Marine Corps drill instructor and a horse trainer. And my mother, well, it's easy to say, while she worked full time, my older brother and I were adopted, but the next 13 were all biological. So she was a full-time mom, a full-time worker, and I did not know her very well. There was a fullness to her schedule. And so as I grew up, we grew up in a very structured household. Oftentimes people use the word rigid and controlling. And I used to use those words, but as I have worked through my upbringing and through that story, I'm learning to use words that feel proper, that are frontiers instead of boundaries. And so, as I'm sharing with you today what my story is and inviting you to walk along with me, I'm going to share with you some of those changes in words, just like, the controlling or the programmed. For me, it was an opportunity to find a foundation, and for so many, to find a foundation that I did not want for myself as I grew older. When I turned 13, right before I turned 13, we moved from Southern California to a little tiny town in Indiana.
Oh, wow,
Uh,
that's a big change.
it was huge. My first morning waking up in Indiana, I woke up to the sound of a cow licking frost off of my window. And coming from Orange County, California to that, I was not sure exactly what I had done, but I was relatively certain I had really angered my father. I was sure it was my fault and that I was paying penance for something that hopefully would be revealed to me. But throughout my childhood, my job was school. My job was to get an education. My job was to do as I was told, because not doing what you were told came with dire consequences. And as I grew and matured, I learned to become a people pleaser. It was imperative that those around me, their expectations were met at all costs.
Mm.
And as so many of us know, those costs usually aren't tangible, they're intangible. And it's our very substance, it's our heart, it's our soul, it's our identity that pays the cost for ensuring that everyone around us is happy at all costs. And so as I turned 18 in our household, the day you turn 18, you are no longer a member of the household because you are an adult. And so even though I hadn't graduated high school, I had to move out of my father's home. So luckily, my grandmommy, who I call my champion and my savior, I was able to stay with my grandmommy and my grandfather until I graduated high school. Went on to college, still living the expectations of those around me. Even though I was no longer in my father's home, I still was guided by the structure that he had set in place and the expectations that he had set forth for me. The first time I broke from that just a little bit, I had decided at graduating, I was valedictorian in my class. So I got a full ride scholarship to a state school. And I won't mention the school because it's not the school's fault that I did not stay there. But after the first semester, I felt invisible and I felt swallowed up and I was almost paralyzed to the point where I didn't feel like I could excel academically, let alone have any sort of a college career and do well towards the other expectations that I was striving for that everyone else had put upon me.
Mm.
And so I went to my father and I said, I'm transferring schools. Mind you, I already had the transfer in place. The acceptance process was done, but it was really the first time that I experienced the disappointment that we feel that is self-imposed because we don't feel like we're living up to our parents' expectations of us. He had a very specific plan for me, and it was a good plan. It would lead to a wonderful life. But I was beginning to realize it wouldn't be my life. And so I made that change. 3 years, I got 2 undergraduate degrees, went on and got my master's degree, met an amazing man. We fall in love. We do all the right things because I'm a rule follower. And 2 months after we are married, he was killed by a drunk driver.
Oh, mercy. I am so sorry.
Thank you. And in that space, what I didn't realize at the time, but I began to be confronted with wounds from my childhood.
Mm.
I didn't know they were wounds. I didn't know I had a childhood full of wounds. I just knew that there was all kinds of ick coming up and I had simply no idea how to engage with it. So I did what I do best and I went into overdrive, making sure that those people around me were cared for. My husband's mother, his family, friends, work coworkers. And so in that beginning transition, though, something else happened in my experience, and I was diagnosed with cancer for the first time. Looking back all of these years later, I see the correlation between the unhealed wounds physically or not physically, they're intangible,
Mhm.
but they materialize in a very physical way. And for me, it was cancer. And so I tackled that head on as I had been taught to. You get all the information, you make the decision, you make a quick decision, and you move forward. And that's what I did. I had a lumpectomy. Turns out with treatment, I needed to have a radical mastectomy. Same day, had reconstructive surgery. All of this shortly after having buried my first husband. In that time and space, what I did was I doubled down on my upbringing because that's what we know. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm grateful that I did because the alternative might have been very dark. So I was glad that I had those skills to just double down on the structure and hold fast to pleasing everyone around me because it carried me from where I was to where I am today. That being said, we fast forward another decade and with an additional cancer diagnosis that had metastasized in my body. At first, I didn't realize that, again, the cancer is really a physical manifestation, in my opinion, for the unhealed wounds inside. Keeping in mind that with all of that passing time, not just my childhood, I was adding more wounds because I was continuing to operate from the same basis of belief that I had operated from as a child. Keep everybody around you happy, do it to the nth degree and at whatever cost, not recognizing that the scar tissue building inside me was actually revolting against my very being, both physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. I'm going to fast forward a couple more years. And in 2007, I was actually down at the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, Florida. I was part of an experimental program because the cancer was not responding. And I met at that point my now husband over the phone. In January of 2007, I'm down in Jacksonville going through this program. I meet this guy on the phone, and it's all business on my side. Matter of fact, one of these days, he'll have to tell his side of the story because it's a much better story from his side. I was finding the end to a means. I had a question. He had the information. I needed it. I got it. I was happy. That was the end of the conversation, but we continued to work together. For him, he gets off that phone call and says, there's something about her. And spoiler alert, a year later, we were married. But if we back up to April of that year, I received a prognosis. I received my first expiration date. An expert in his field, an expert at one of the top hospitals in the world, said, AmiLynne, you need to go home and get your things in order. You need to get your shit in order because you're not going to make it beyond 6 weeks.
Wow.
So I did what most people do, and I went home and I bawled my eyes out.
Yeah.
I'm a rule follower. I've done what I was supposed to. I've dedicated my life to everyone else's happiness. WTF, you know? And then I woke up on that third day and I recognized something. I recognized that that was his best understanding of what my life was going to look like moving forward if I didn't do anything to change it.
Ooh, that's a big piece right there.
And it was an invitation. It was the scariest invitation I have ever received in my life. But I now see that it was an invitation because it's an invitation to actually introduce myself to myself and determine who I wanted to be and how I wanted to be that. And at first it was like, look, I got 6 weeks. How do I want to enjoy it? I'm going to live my fullest life in the next 6 weeks. But what I came to realize is that it was through questioning absolutely everything I believed. Because you wake up on that third day and you recognize that that's his highest sense of right. That's his belief. Well, people believe different things. What if I believed something different? What if I believed I could live 7 weeks or 7 months or 7 years? And so I began to question. And I had a lot of questioning to do because I had never truly thought anything for myself. I did what I did because I was told to do it growing up, and the consequences of not doing it were dire. Then as you matriculate out into the world beyond college and then a career, I'm meeting all of the societal expectations, and they are so heavy. But I met them, not knowing what made me happy, or actually not even knowing why I was doing what I was doing, except that that's what I had always done. And so I began to question everything. And look, I'd been raised in a Christian household that had some really rigid beliefs. So I had walked away from church, religion, spirituality, I don't care what you call it. But I decided that I was going to read every scriptural text, every spiritual text I could find. So I read the Christian Bible, the Jewish Torah, I read the Quran, I read the Bhagavad Gita, I read the Vedas, anything. And I was just seeking to understand what these thought leaders would say life was all about. Now, that was back in 2007. It's 2024. We can do the math. I'll let somebody else do that. That's not my strength. But what I know now is that from 1971 until 2007, I operated from a philosophy of borrowed beliefs. And those beliefs carried me through that time frame and served me quite well because I was successful by the terms of society, my parents' expectations from work and career. But I was empty. And so in that moment, when someone is telling me that the number after the dash on my tombstone was within sight, I knew in that moment I needed to be doing something different. And what an amazing opportunity, quite honestly, for a type A personality to just prove them all wrong.
Right. Again, yes.
Yes. So it becomes this space of recognizing these years later, after really embarking on this journey of self-discovery, of not adhering to a belief because my parents had said either this is the way it should be or doing it the opposite because they said this is the way it should be, but to really explore and discover, to pick up ideas and roll them over and poke them with a stick and take off the upper layers and dig down deep inside and get into the goo to really determine what it is that I'm here for. And quite honestly, if I wanted to continue in that space. Because up and until that point, I didn't feel like my life had been my choice. And part of that I had to acknowledge is because I'd kind of farmed out that responsibility, especially after I'd left my father's home. Shortly thereafter, both my mother and my father passed away within 6 months of each other. And yet I still continued to operate under this rigid structure because it's all I had known. So the first thing I started to do was get really angry at myself for allowing all of these years to pass and for me to exist after doing everything that I had been told in a place of feeling abandoned, of feeling lost, of being terrified of what tomorrow could look like. Because if I take the structure away, even though I know it's not serving me right now, if I take that structure away, what do I have? And the fear of that, quite honestly, for some time moving forward, kept me from really digging deeply. But I also had this prognosis over here kind of chirping at the back of my head that said, well, if for no other reason, do it to prove them all wrong. And so as I began to look at the beliefs that had been instilled by my parents, my grandparents, Sunday school teachers, leaders in the community, school, professors, and then matriculating into a place of the world where now I've got societal expectations, I began to question everything that I believed, because these borrowed beliefs do not create a foundation of identity in a moment of crisis.
Yeah, because it's not like it's gnosis, it's belief.
Right. Right. It's not identity. It's not being able to say, I've even gone so far as to say that I'm recognizing now when people call it like a crisis of faith or a midlife crisis, it's a crisis of belief,
Mm.
because we've built a life based around beliefs that we may or may not truly understand and likely don't, but they've served us well enough that we don't explore it and dig deeper. But at this point in my life, those beliefs were no longer serving me. And so I had to figure out what I did believe. And for someone who wasn't taught critical thinking skills growing up, because you do what you do because you're told to do it and the consequences are dire, it was both freeing and terrifying
Mhm.
to explore this space where I could be whoever I wanted to be. And what I decided is that the fear was nothing more and nothing less than imagination. Because I know what's operating right now. I can see what's reality in front of me. And if I am so paralyzed by fear to move forward, it's because I'm imagining the things that could go wrong. I'm imagining the things that I won't do right. I'm imagining the people I will disappoint. But I'm imagining all of that. It's not yet happened. And at that point, that rose up a curiosity in me that said, well, if that's all imagining, how much of what behind me was imagining?
That's pretty profound. About how old were you at this point?
When this all really was coming to a head for me, 35,
Okay.
about 17 years ago.
Wow.
And so it was this place of it's also about perspective. And I don't remember when this thought came to me, and I know it was shared by a friend, but I don't remember all of the specifics. So, but I know at the time it really didn't hit me what it really meant. But we were talking about perspective. And I think that when we live in a place that feels really dark, perspective is one of the most amazing gifts and tools that we can have in our toolkit to help us see things differently.
Mhm.
Because if we stand at a corner, and let's just say for the sake of this argument that you're on the northwest corner and I'm on the southeast corner, and in between us is a high-rise building on fire. Now, obviously the fire people come in and they put the fire out. And while they're doing that, you already have people on the ground getting interviewed. What do you know? What did you see? What was your, what happened? What you share in that interview is going to be very different from the northwest corner than what I shared when I was interviewed, possibly even by someone else, about what I saw and experienced from the southeast corner. And what I experienced being different than what you experienced didn't make it wrong.
It's just different.
It made it different. And different doesn't make it wrong. It just makes it different.
Yep.
And so that allowed me this grace as I began to dig out of the darkness. And sometimes I was digging with a thimble, and sometimes I was digging with a backhoe, and sometimes I had to go back to the thimble because it all felt so heavy.
Mm.
But as we're growing through the darkness, one, it's so important to remember that perspective is an amazing travel partner. And that asking someone else's perspective of our experience Not asking them to fix me. I'm not broken. Not asking them to judge me. I got that handled. I'll judge myself plenty harsh all day long. But what is your perspective? If you were me, how could you see things differently? And that doesn't mean, and at first I felt like that might give me something to hold on to that could then carry me toward my own understanding. And we have to be careful not to latch onto it so tightly that we then stop doing the work for our own growth and healing because it's somebody else's perspective. And also to recognize that someone else's perspective of where we are, while it may have value, it is not our identity. A butterfly cannot see its own wings.
Similarly, I don't think a butterfly would look back at the caterpillar process and say, ew, right?
Exactly, exactly. And here's the amazing thing when we're in that darkness, that transformation between the caterpillar to the butterfly is the one creature on the face of the planet that it has been scientifically proven that 100% of their DNA changes from the caterpillar to the butterfly.
Wow.
Not an iota of DNA of caterpillar DNA exists in a butterfly.
Oh,
And so that evolution, that transformation, that time in the chrysalis, when they literally, every ounce of that caterpillar's being is being decomposed into goo to be built back up, to become this amazing butterfly. And don't get me wrong, this isn't all about puppy dog tails and butterflies and all of the good stuff, because sometimes those butterflies come out of the chrysalis and they've got a wing that isn't properly formed, or they've got damage to their body. But here's another butterfly fact. A butterfly can defy gravity and take flight with up to 70% of its wing damaged or missing.
wow. That's
Now, science would tell us it's impossible, right?
right. Right.
Society would tell us that we have nothing to give, or that what we've been giving has no value, or that there's not a place for us here. And I call BS. Bumblebees, aerodynamically, their little chubby bodies scientifically cannot defy gravity and take flight. And I don't know about you, but I've seen a few of them, and
Right.
they do. And they don't do that to spite science. They do it because that's what they're here to do. And that while it may be in complete contradiction to what is known about certain environmental laws, societal expectations, it doesn't stop them from living their true identity, their true self, and bringing amazing value to this world. Without bees, bumblebees included, pollination doesn't happen. Beautiful flowers don't happen. Vegetable gardens don't grow. Do you think the bee or the bumblebee understands, or even the butterfly whose lifespan is like 6 weeks? I think they understand the ripple of the benefit of them stepping on one flower and going over and stepping on another and fertilizing it?
Right.
And yet, because they don't know, even not knowing that ripple effect that carries life forward for other creatures, they don't devalue their own existence. So it's so important that we remember we only get to see a snapshot of what life really is and the impact that we are having. So it's important that no matter how challenging it may feel, or heavy it may feel, or even awkward and wrong and confusing and regretful, we still need to show up because we don't know the ripple effect that we will have simply by showing up.
Right. You're limited in your own perspective. So having that, I think it takes some courage to ask other people, what is your perspective of
Right.
what I should do in this situation, or what you think I should do differently, or whatever. Like opening yourself up to that information sometimes
Yes.
is not exactly what we want, but maybe it's what we need, right?
Well, it's a space where we then get to choose. Just because they've given our perspective, just because they have a belief, doesn't mean we have to borrow that belief for our own experience. But so often, what I have found is that in talking through one challenge or another, or one idea or another, one stumbling block or another, simply by talking with someone about it out loud, the answers, even if it's just a peek, a sneak peek of an answer, reveals itself, not necessarily in something that the other person has said. Because I believe that when we are born, and I think that this is universal across most, if not all, faith backgrounds, when we are created perfect, whole, and complete. And when the world begins to bring upon wounds through experience, what happens is we forget that perfection. And I'm not talking human perfection. Look, I'm a quadriplegic, and to me, a perfect body doesn't sit in a chair all day long and wait for someone else to care for it. So this isn't about human perfection, but this is about divine perfection, cosmic perfection, universal perfection, in that we were created and we are here for a reason. And we may not know what that reason is. Do you think the butterfly or the bees recognize that without them, without them pollinating flowers, we don't get fruit. We don't get all of the things that we get from that. So
Right.
it's not about necessarily knowing our purpose. Because I can tell you on any given day, I kind of wobble on that question. But what I do know is that I'm here to show up, and I'm here to show up the best I can. And sometimes that best looks really awful to others. Sometimes that best looks really awful to me. But same as perspectives are different and important, that takes us from this place of, if we take just a step back, borrowed beliefs. Well, borrowed beliefs aren't going to carry us through a place to fulfillment or self-identity. We have to begin questioning. And part of that questioning process is being open to different perspectives. But it's also really important that we set down the resource of comparison.
Mm. Yeah,
Because
we're different.
the enemy of growth is comparison. The enemy of progress is comparison, because comparison for so many of us paralyzes us. I'm not doing it like they would. I'm not doing it how they did. That's, to me, that's part of the challenge in the whole self-help, how to world. The question shouldn't be how to. When you're listening to a podcast, when you're reading a book or watching, a workshop or a presentation or whatever, for me, my goal at the end is for you to be able to answer the question, how do I? How do I take what's been shared and apply that to my life?
Mhm.
How do I take these ideas? Darkness. Dude, darkness is so heavy.
Can be.
But what does darkness tell us? From a scientific perspective, we know that in order for us to see darkness, there has to be light present.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it's a vast nothingness. And we're not feeling nothing. We are feeling many things. We just don't know what to do with it. Even saying we feel numb is something because we've attached an idea to what numb is. And so the presence of darkness is not the indication that there is no light. It's just an invitation to look differently than we have in the past for that light, to ask different questions, to show up the best we're able on any given day, in any given moment, to not compare ourselves to someone else's journey, because that's their journey and we don't know what they went through to get where they're at. And oh, by the way, to not take on what they say about us. Those borrowed beliefs can be paralyzing. It creates stagnation because if that's what they believe about me, well, who am I? And I think so often in that darkness, if we don't know who we are and we don't know why we're there, and we don't believe that there is even an iota of light present, then that leads us to hopelessness.
Mm.
And I've been
Place to
hopeless in
be.
my life. It's okay to feel the hopelessness. It's okay to express the hopelessness. And if you're feeling that sense of hopelessness or helplessness, the only thing you can do, the only thing you need to do is to continue to show up and be present, to ask for the help. And look, you may have to ask 50 people for that help because everybody's carrying their own journey, but help is there. And that help might not look like what we think we need. Don't reject it just because it's not what you think you need. Engage as best you're able in that new perspective, because sometimes it's the lifeboat that carries us back to shore so that we can find our own identity and begin to rebuild in a way that carries us forward to horizons and frontiers that we could have never imagined. That the imagining of fear kept us safe is a misunderstanding of fear and an absolute injustice to imagination. But if we can flip that idea on its back, I mean, think about the creativity of an artist or a pianist or, even someone who runs marathons and is a sports. Anything can be art
Mhm.
that brings out passion.
It should all be art.
Right. It's all art, but art requires creativity.
Mhm.
Creativity requires imagination. So in those dark moments, when we feel hopeless and helpless, what if we were to flip the script and use imagination for what could be
Mhm.
and how I could reside in that space if I wasn't stuck believing all of these borrowed beliefs?
And I think that I know that imagination takes the same energy to think about fearful things as it does to think about creative things. So right there is your choice.
Yeah. Well, and it takes the same amount of energy, but the end result is polar opposite.
That's true.
It's polar opposite. I've often heard it said that fear protects us.
Yeah.
Well, fear, if wait a minute, if fear is protecting us, it's protecting us from our imagination.
Yeah.
And look, there's a component of fear that's good. I should fear stepping out in front of a bus. Not so good things could happen, whether it's on purpose or otherwise by accident, not paying attention to my surroundings. But fear was never meant to be a quality that guided our life.
Mm.
It's meant to be a small part of our toolbox. It's just like love. Love to extreme, obsession, not good.
Felt so bad.
Right. So if we can look at the things that we have at our disposal, and whether it's a health crisis, a relationship crisis, a financial crisis, career crisis, maybe you're parenting and oh my gosh, my kids are turning out differently than I had expected. There's nothing wrong with taking 5 minutes and flipping the script and imagining the good that can come from making a different decision. And we are freed to make different decisions when we are not loyal to a borrowed belief.
I really love that you went to the depths of questioning everything.
Oh, everything.
I mean, I started questioning everything when I was in like sixth grade. Things weren't
Oh,
adding up, and I started wondering. So I started looking for answers at the library back when you had to go to the library.
yeah, I remember those places.
Mhm, mhm.
And a library card and everything.
Yeah, yeah, for real. We could check out VHS videos sometimes. It was wild. But you started questioning all these things and obviously kept the cancer at bay at the very least,
Right.
right? And you've transformed your life from that point and decided to do the things that you wanted to do. Like, what were some things that you discovered about yourself, like things that you wanted to do or things that you were interested in that really kind of surprised you?
Well, I never imagined myself on a spiritual journey, and I never imagined supporting others on their spiritual journey. Because who am I? I have no value, I have no worth. So, what I have to say, if it didn't come from a book, if it's not academic and intellectual, it has no value. And what I learned along the way is that all of life has value. And that I think one of the most important lessons I've learned is to understand the definition of any given word.
Mm. Words have meanings and they're important to understand.
Right. And when I'm having a conversation with someone else and they've shared something, especially if they've then asked me a question about it afterwards, or if they lead with the question, man, I got to tell you, that's a really great question. How do you see sin? What is your belief about success? What's your definition of success? What does it mean to you? Because for me to answer that question out of the blue, I don't know my audience.
Right.
I don't know how it will be received. And it's one of those things, and that takes me to one of those lessons in that rigid environment that I grew up with that I'm now deeply grateful for with a twist. Because as it came to communication growing up, I was taught that you are always preparing the next statement, the next rebuttal, the next. I mean, I feel like I essentially grew up, living under the debate team captain's tutelage.
I mean, that's a lot of living in the future versus living in the present.
Right. And it also, what I didn't learn through that process was how to listen,
Yeah,
not to listen to somebody else, forget listening to myself.
right.
So now, what that life lesson as a child taught me is that it's imperative to understand where they're coming from
Hmm.
so that when you respond, so that when you're sharing, you can use common language. And that may mean that you need to explain a word or two here or there, and not from a condescending way.
No, just defining terms respectfully.
Yeah, exactly. But it also gives you an opportunity to open dialogue because you're saying, well, tell me what that means to you. And most people like to talk about themselves.
It's true.
They're like, no, 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 no. You tell me what you think. And then I'll, maybe that rarely ever happens, if ever. So it's okay to ask clarifying questions as we walk through this life. And the only way to not continue to function and rely on borrowed beliefs is to ask questions and
Clarity.
to recognize. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say clarity.
Yeah, it's that clarity and to recognize that perspectives can be different. Different doesn't make it wrong, it just makes it different.
Right.
And that just because you're not able to accomplish something in the way others expected doesn't mean you can't accomplish it elseways. Otherwise able doesn't mean unable. Ask a quadriplegic that used to be a type AAA personality. If it's going to be, it's up to me. I rely on no one because people let me down. Now, if it's going to be, it takes a team. I rely heavily on those around me. And doing those two things doesn't mean I have less value or worth. What it means is I get to invite people into my life where they get to express their strengths, their passions, their callings. And so it becomes a symbiotic place for growth.
Absolutely.
I don't have to have it all figured out. I get to ask for help along the way. And I get to remember that not everybody has been through my journey. And so how they show up is how they show up. I get to love them where they're at because that's what I would like, especially in my not so lovable moments.
I think grace is something that's far overlooked and underutilized, both in our interactions with others and in understanding ourselves.
Totally, totally. Compassion is not a weakness.
It's a strength.
Compassion is the bridge we build from where we are at to maybe to where someone else is,
Hmm.
inviting them off that that island of abandonment, inviting ourselves, creating a pathway for ourselves off the island of abandonment.
Inviting understanding.
Yeah. And understanding doesn't mean we have to agree.
No, but we can respectfully disagree, and that doesn't disempower either of us if we come at the situation with respect and compassion.
Exactly. Exactly. I have a saying now after all of these years, I kind of grew up in a space where you are your brother's keeper.
Hmm.
And I've kind of switched it. One, I'm not a brother, but I'm also not my sister's keeper. And the reason I'm not my sister's keeper is because I am my sister.
Mm.
I am you and you are me. And each of us is simply just trying to do the best we can. And my opinion of your best doesn't matter. And your opinion of my best shouldn't matter to me.
Ooh, I love that.
I'm not my sister's keeper. I'm simply my sister. And approaching life from that perspective requires grace,
Hmm.
requires perspective, requires compassion and understanding and bridge building. And there's not place for judgment, and there's not place for expectations. There's not a place for all of these external qualities that may serve us in small doses, but when they become our foundation, they push out our identity and begin to fill in places that aren't us.
What a journey. My goodness. AmiLynne, you took me places. in this
Oh,
conversation.
good. I love being a travel partner.
Fantastic. So, what do you do with your time and attention now?
My time and attention now is truly dedicated to being for others who I wish I had had available to me in my darkest moments. And, from a materialistic marketing world, I'm a spiritual transformation and trauma coach. Um, and I'm also now going to redefine the word coach for you because I hate the word coach in the world because so many people can just hang out a placard. For me, my title is Chief Travel Partner because there's not a journey out there that isn't easier or made better or more full having the right travel partner with us. And sometimes that travel partner is asking us questions. And sometimes that travel partner is simply listening.
Mm.
Sometimes that travel partner pulls up next to us and sits quietly while we explore or while we feel a feeling, sometimes for the first time, so that we don't have to do it alone. So for me, being that chief travel partner, I put together courses. I've got a book. I just recently released a book in June 1st, Conversations of Consequence, Lessons from the Still Small Voice. When we are surrounded by darkness, we feel like every conversation is just so superficial that why engage?
Mm.
And for me, I want to focus on having conversations of consequence, something that you can take away from our exchange and something that I can take away from you during that exchange. But for me, really, all of that is secondary to just simply being that person. Ram Dass says, we're just here walking each other home.
Your story.
And I'm here not only to help you walk home, but to allow you to help me walk home.
I love it. How can people get in touch with you if they'd like to work with you?
Very easy. I know you're going to have my name spelled correctly in the show notes.
AmiLynne for everyone listening.
There we go. And then the last name is Carroll. 2 R's, 2 L's, Carroll. My website, AmiLynneCarroll.com. Facebook, AmiLynne Carroll. Instagram, AmiLynne Carroll. YouTube, AmiLynne Carroll. I've got a series called Ramblings from an Emerging Butterfly that are quick 3 to 5 minute ramblings. And so I also have something on my website that a lot of people don't have. And I have a voicemail widget.
Oh, how fun.
Because, sometimes when you're reaching out for help, you don't know how to put it in words
Yeah.
or to type it out. And gosh, this is going to sound stupid. I have people that call that voicemail and leave me a voicemail that's just a stream of consciousness brain dump. And then I get back with them. And then we go wherever it is we're meant to go together. And so I encourage you, if you're looking for a travel partner that's going to love you where you're at while seeing the potential of where you can go at the same time, reach out because I'm here to help you walk home.
AmiLynne, thank you so much for joining us today. This was really lovely.
Thanks for the invite, and thank you for those who've listened for the full episode. I so adore your podcast and the work that you are called to, because I get so much from that. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of your community and to share with you today.